Red Bull didn't just test something at Silverstone. Verstappen showed something that changes everything. A car that was nearly half a second too slow, carrying around 20 kilograms of extra weight, so unpredictable even he couldn't trust it at full speed. And then suddenly, in one secret run, that same car starts to feel controllable, stable, almost normal. But here's the part nobody expected. The change you can see is not the real upgrade. The real upgrade is hidden, deep inside the car. A complete system reset that connects airflow, weight, and balance in a way no other team can copy mid-season. And that raises one serious question. Did Verstappen just reveal the start of a comeback? Or something so extreme, it might fall apart the moment it's pushed to the limit? It did not look dramatic at first. No big headlines. No official reveal. Just a quiet session, and a few subtle changes. But that is exactly what made it so important. Because what Verstappen showed was not obvious. It was hidden in the way the car moved. The way it entered corners. The way it held stability mid-turn. The way it responded, instead of reacting. And that difference is where everything starts. Because before Silverstone, the RB22 had one defining flaw. It could not be trusted. Not fully. Not consistently. One lap it behaved one way. The next lap, completely different. And when a driver feels that, he stops pushing. He leaves margin. He protects himself from the unknown. And that is exactly what was happening. Even Verstappen, one of the most aggressive drivers on the grid, was holding back. But then comes Silverstone. A controlled environment. Limited laps. Just enough to feel, but not enough to hide. And suddenly, that hesitation starts to disappear. Not completely, but enough to notice. Enough to show something has changed. And here is where the first visible clue comes in. The front wing. Those small elements added to the end plates. Easy to miss, but incredibly important. Because they control airflow around the front tires. They reduce turbulence. They stabilize the air entering the rest of the car. And here is the key detail. Every other team already had them. Red Bull did not, until now. So this is not innovation. This is correction. Fixing something that should have been there from the start. But that alone does not explain what Verstappen felt. Because front wing changes do not suddenly make a car predictable. Something deeper is happening. And this is where everything connects. The weight problem. Around 20 kilograms above the limit. That forced Red Bull into compromises. Less aerodynamic load. Less complexity. A simplified car, just to keep it manageable. But now, those compromises are being reversed. Weight is being reduced. Balance is shifting. Aerodynamics are being restored. And that creates a chain reaction. Because once the weight drops, the entire car begins to behave differently. The front end gains precision. The mid-corner becomes stable. The rear becomes more predictable. And suddenly, the car starts to make sense. That is what Verstappen showed. Not speed. Clarity. But here is where things become more complicated. Because when you reconnect all these systems, you also reintroduce risk. More aerodynamic load means more sensitivity. More sensitivity means less tolerance for mistakes. And that is where the real challenge begins. Because now the car might be faster, but also more fragile. More dependent on perfect conditions. More exposed when something goes wrong. And this is why Silverstone only tells part of the story. Because everything there is controlled. No traffic. No dirty air. No race pressure. Miami will be different. And what Verstappen showed will be tested in a way that cannot be controlled. Because if that new stability survives, then Red Bull has found something powerful. Something that changes the direction of the season. But if it does not, then what we saw at Silverstone was not a breakthrough. It was just the first moment where the car felt good, before reality pushed it back to where it was before. But this is where the illusion can break. Because what Verstappen experienced was a version of the car in isolation. Clean air. Perfect rhythm. No interruptions. And Formula One races are the exact opposite. Dirty air changes everything. The moment you follow another car, airflow becomes unstable. Front grip disappears. Balance shifts. Confidence drops instantly. And this is where Red Bull's new system faces its biggest challenge. Because this upgrade is not designed to be forgiving. It is designed to be precise. Every airflow channel, optimized. Every surface, working at maximum efficiency. Every component, dependent on the others. Which means when conditions are perfect, the car becomes incredibly effective. But when they are not, the same system can become unstable again. And that is exactly the line Red Bull is walking. Because the RB22 was never a simple car. It is an extreme concept. Ultra-narrow side pods. Aggressive internal packaging. A design that pushes airflow to its limits. And that kind of concept does not behave well under pressure. It reacts. It shifts. It exposes weaknesses faster than traditional designs. And we have already seen signs of that. Japan. A race where cooling became an issue. Where Verstappen had to back off, not because of pace, but because of risk. And that tells you something critical. The car is operating close to its limits. Very close. So now imagine adding more aerodynamic load. More complexity. More dependence on precise airflow. That does not reduce risk. It amplifies it. And this is why Miami becomes the real test. Not just because of performance, but because of stress, heat, track temperature, long runs. Everything that pushes the car beyond controlled conditions. Because if this new version of the RB22 can survive that, then what Verstappen showed at Silverstone is real. A genuine step forward. A car that finally aligns with its design. But if it cannot, then the same issues return. Instability. Unpredictability, loss of confidence, and suddenly, the progress disappears. Which leads to something even more important. Because this is not just about the car. It is about the direction of the entire team. Red Bull is not making small adjustments anymore. They are committing to a philosophy. A way of building performance through extreme efficiency. Through interconnected systems. Through risk. And that philosophy either pays off, or forces a complete rethink. There is no middle ground. And that is why what Verstappen showed matters so much. Because he did not just show improvement. He showed a glimpse of what the car could become. But a glimpse is not a guarantee. And now everything depends on whether that glimpse can survive reality. Because if it does, this becomes the turning point of the season. But if it does not, then Silverstone was not the solution. It was just the moment before everything gets tested, for real. And when that real test begins, everything accelerates. Because Formula One does not give you time to adjust. It forces answers. Immediately. The first qualifying lap will already reveal more than the entire Silverstone test. Because now the car is pushed to the limit. Low fuel. Maximum attack. No margin for error. And this is where one detail becomes decisive. Rotation. How the car turns into a corner. Because that is where the RB22 has struggled the most. Not just lack of grip, but inconsistency. A front end that sometimes bites and sometimes does not. And when that happens, the driver cannot commit. He hesitates. Just slightly. But in Formula One, that slight hesitation costs everything. So if this new system truly works, that hesitation disappears. The car turns exactly when expected. Lap after lap. Corner after corner. And that is when something changes. Not just performance. Confidence. And confidence unlocks aggression. Late braking. Earlier throttle. More speed carried through the corner. And suddenly, lap time appears. Not because the car is dramatically faster, but because the driver can finally use all of it. That is what Verstappen was beginning to show. But now comes the race. And this is where things get even more intense. Because over a full race distance, the car does not stay the same. Fuel burns off. Tires degrade. Track conditions evolve. And a system this sensitive reacts to all of it. Which means stability at the start does not guarantee stability at the end. And this is where Red Bull's concept faces its ultimate challenge. Consistency. Not one good lap. Not one strong stint. An entire race, without the balance collapsing. Because if the car remains predictable, if Verstappen can push without second guessing, then everything changes. Red Bull is back. Not gradually. Immediately. But if at any point, the balance shifts again, the unpredictability returns, then the same cycle begins. Lift the throttle. Protect the car. Lose time. And the entire advantage disappears. Which brings us to the final reality of what Verstappen showed. It was not just improvement. It was potential under perfect conditions. Now, that potential has to survive imperfection. Traffic. Heat. Pressure. And most importantly, time. Because maintaining performance over a full race is something completely different from finding it in a test. And that is why this moment matters so much. Because what we are about to see is not just whether the upgrades work. It is whether the entire concept finally holds together. Because if it does, Red Bull did not just fix the RB22. They unlocked it. But if it does not, then what Verstappen showed was never the full picture. It was just the best version of a car that still has limits waiting to appear. And this is where everything reaches its final layer. Because there is one thing Silverstone could never reveal. Pressure. Real pressure. Not the kind you simulate. The kind that builds lap after lap, when the stakes are real. Because once the race unfolds, everything changes. Strategy comes into play. Tire wear starts to matter. And suddenly, the car is no longer isolated. It is fighting. Wheel to wheel. Corner after corner. And that is where the RB22 has been most vulnerable. Not in clean air. Not in perfect conditions. But in chaos. Because when the car sits behind another, airflow becomes disturbed. The front loses precision. The balance shifts again. And all that confidence Verstappen started to feel can disappear in seconds. That is the real danger. Because this new system relies on stability, on controlled airflow, on everything working exactly as designed. But racing does not respect design. It breaks it, forces it to adapt, pushes it beyond its limits. And that is where the truth finally appears. Because if this car can survive that environment, dirty air, high tire degradation, constant pressure, then what Verstappen showed was not just potential. It was the beginning of something dominant. A car that finally connects performance with control. A car that allows him to push without hesitation. And when Verstappen can do that, the outcome is usually the same. But if the system starts to break under those conditions, if the balance shifts again, if the unpredictability returns, then everything we saw at Silverstone changes meaning. It was not a solution. It was a controlled version of a problem. And that is the key difference. Because a car that only works in perfect conditions is not competitive in Formula 1. It is vulnerable. And that is the edge Red Bull is standing on right now. Because they did not choose a safe path. They chose an extreme one. A concept that promises maximum performance, but demands absolute precision. And now, there is nowhere left to hide. Because over a full race distance, with no control over variables, no ability to reset conditions, the RB22 will reveal exactly what it is. Not what it could be. Not what it felt like. What it truly is. Either a machine that has finally been unlocked, or one that still carries a hidden instability waiting to return. And when that moment comes, there will be no interpretation. No debate. Only one clear answer. Everything Verstappen showed was either the start of a comeback, or the calm before the real problem comes back.